Simon Richards doesn't really need much introduction. He's my fellow Vice President and former Treasurer of the Royal. He's also the one man who's on a different time zone to the rest of us. I'm sure he has 10 days in every week where the rest of us have 7 because he seems to be doing so much. You probably don't know that he's the President of the West Indies Philatelic Study Group. He's the Treasurer of the National Philatelic Society, a Stuart Roster Trustee, an FIP International Judge, and currently has 5 international exhibits and chairs the ABPS Exhibitions Committee. He's also a member of another 22 different philatelic societies, which suggests, as you're about to see, he collects far too much. So over to you, Simon.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining this afternoon. When the postal authorities started to issue more and more postage stamps, I stopped collecting the new issues and turned my attention to postmarks, possibly reflecting my accounting background, the numeral postmarks in particular. So all the examples shown here today are from my own collections, and you may well end up agreeing with Simon and my wife that I collect far too many things. Well, we all know that Great Britain issued the world's first adhesive postage stamps on the 6th of May 1840. But did you realise that England introduced the postmark in 1661, a simple circle with 2 letters for the month and 2 figures for the day, and this developed to include the year in the 1780s, a boon to commerce as independent proof of when a document was sent. But Britain was also the first to introduce the numeral cancel. Prepaid adhesive labels, stamps, need to be cancelled to prevent reuse with loss of revenue to the postal authorities. So alongside the penny black, we get the famous Maltese cross, first applied in red. The colour combination was reversed in 1841 with the change to the penny red and the cancellation in black. Well, by 1843, the Inland Office in London used Maltese crosses with a numeral in the centre to indicate which clerk had handled the mail. And there's just numbers 1 to 12, and here's number 8. The following year, it was decided to issue cancellors using numbers to identify the office where the item was posted, the 1844 series, and you see an early example here from Newcastle. Well, in England and Wales, the initial allocation of April 1844 encompassed numbers 1 to 930, Abergavenny to York, and these were of a barred oval format, designed that 3 figures could fit on the stamp, and these came into use on the 1st of May 1844. The following month in Scotland, a rectangular design was introduced, the numerals 1 to 342, Aberdeen to Wishart, again alphabetically. Similarly for Ireland, a diamond pattern with numerals 1 to 450, Abbeyleix to Youghal, was issued. And there are a number of well-illustrated books on the subject, Stan Challice's recent work on the Irish diamonds and Parmenter's series. But what I'm going to turn to now is to show how Britain influenced the world not just with the postage stamp, but also with the numeral cancels. Now, in the space of our 35-40 minutes or so this afternoon, there's only time to look at a few examples, and these will include most of my favourites. In Europe, a number of countries had seen the advantage of using postage stamps to denote prepayment, and the resulting dramatic increase in correspondence that came about with the reduced costs involved. There was also a time when literacy was increasing, and the 1850s were a time of incipient communications revolution. Barden introduced postage stamps on the 1st of May 1851, along with a series of 5-ring numeral cancels. The initial allocation was alphabetical and ran from 1 arc to 163 zel in Wiesenstahl. The first stamps of Barden were issued on coloured paper, which doesn't always show up the cancel clearly. The examples on this page include 139 from the first issue on a piece from Stockach with the identifying mark of origin. Also 2 examples from the 1852 issue, 4 Aglas Hausen and 18 Breton. along with 172 Schiltach. Now, black ink doesn't show up very well on the coloured papers, and so many of the offices tried red ink, as shown by this cover from Waldschut to Hüttingen by Efklingen. The 153 has been struck on a 3 kreuzers stamp in 1851, which paid the postage for a distance of up to 10 miles, which is 10 Bavarian miles, that's roughly 74 kilometres, and the distance between these two towns was 73, so it just made the band. Almost half the offices tried blue ink, as on the 74 here from Kreuzingen. Baden is the most collectible territory for numeral cancels, as not that many additional offices were opened before it was subsumed into the Prussian Empire. And here we've got 166 of Gondelsheim, which is an office opened on the 1st of July 1854. And nor were there many reallocations of the cancels, 10 being one of the exceptions, which was initially allocated to Beugen, where it was only struck in blue, before it was reallocated to Rheinfelden from the 1st of February 1856. So this example must be from there, as it struck in black. Only 8 Baden numerals were reallocated, which makes life much easier if you're trying to collect off cover. Otherwise, you need a cover or a large piece to be sure which office was involved. The Austro-German Postal Union came into effect on the 1st of July 1850 and was the stimulus for many states to issue adhesive postage stamps. Saxony was the second of the German states to do so, with the famous Saxon Dreyer issued on the 29th of June 1850. The coat of arms was also a 3-pfennig stamp, and then you got 4 denominations with the profile of Friedrich Augustus, which followed on the 1st of August 1851. The numeral cancels with this attractive netted design didn't come in until the 1st of November that year. Now, the Saxon numerals were issued to offices in order of importance rather than alphabetically, so Dresden is 1, Leipzig 2, and so on, which solved the problem of what to do when new offices opened. As a general rule, higher numbers will be scarcer, though the development of the railways did rather change things. Numerals to 177's Wernitz can be found on the Friedrich Augustus issues, and he died in August 1854. Stamps with the head of King Johann were issued on the 1st of June 1855 and are generally found with numeral cancels. During his reign, the network expanded to 220 Kunewalder, which is an office opened on the 1st of March 1859. The Saxon arms type shows off the cancels particularly well, making these attractive issues to collect. Curlers even do a printed album to help you. And the arms type came out on the 1st of July 1863 and remained in use until the end of 1867, when Saxony was absorbed into the North German Confederation. But from mid-1859, new post offices, though numbered, didn't actually receive a netted canceller. There are 2 examples on this slide, 59 Schopau and 84 Tharent. And this brings us to Prussia. Now, as with Baden, the numeral cancels were introduced alongside the introduction of postage stamps on the 15th of November 1850. The scale of the task was considerable, and numbers from 1 to 1725 were introduced alphabetically in a 4-ringed circle design. The Prussian authorities clearly thought that 4 numbers would appear legibly on the adhesive. At this time, Prussia was, in a postal sense, divided up into 26 Oberpostdirektionen, OPDs, but an alphabetical allocation was chosen ahead of any more localized allocation to the OPDs. This slide shows a number of the OPD numerals, and again, the coloured papers didn't help with the clarity of the strike. But you may also like to look at these offices and contemplate just how many of these are still in Germany today. Collecting numeral cancels brings out the completest in the collector, but collecting Prussia is a huge task. I may have over 90% of the Baden numerals and 80% of Saxony, with Prussia I've scarcely scratched the surface. Prussia eventually extended the numeral sequence to 1987, Sulenshin in the Danzig region, which opened on the 1st of March 1859. And in Prussia, there are numerous reallocations of offices. It was still a relatively stable situation for the 1850s, when the world was undergoing this communications revolution. The 20th century was rather less stable for Germany, and the answer to the question I posed is just one: Aachen. In Bavaria, actually the first German state to introduce postage stamps on 1st of November 1849, numeral cancels followed on the 23rd of July the following year, using a mill wheel design, the Mullrad. The closed mill wheel design of the initial allocation was alphabetical and ran to 402, Abensberg to Zwiesel. The number sequence continued as new offices were opened until late 1856, when in November the numerals were recalled and then redistributed in alphabetical order on the 1st of December 1856, so that collecting them off cover is difficult, as they could have been used either on the first allocation or the second. Abensberg, for example, became number 2 and not number 1, as an office had been opened in Abach since the first issue had been sent out. Zwiesel became 606, which was the highest number of the closed design. If you have an example on the 3 Kreutzer blue, well, if they're from plate 1 or 2, and here we've got 8 from Hamburg and 237 Neustadt, then probably they're from the initial allocation, whereas by plates 4 or 5, then almost certainly the second allocation. And for the 6 Kreutzer examples here, we can only say probably the 416 is Marktredwitz, and 598 is almost certainly Würzburg. Now, it was quickly realised that this may not have been the best plan. And from the beginning of 1857, new offices were allocated numerals in a different, more open mill wheel design. So here we see some examples contrasting nicely with the variety of colours used by Bavaria. This sequence ran to 920 Dirmstein, which was issued on the 1st of February 1869. Shortly before the numeral cancel ceased to be used on the 9th of March, and thus a very scarce strike. In the period from 1856 to 1869, if the closed mill wheel canceller was damaged or lost, then a new one was issued with a new open design, but the office retaining the same number. Belgium was the first country in Europe to adopt numerals on the 1st of July 1849. When introduced with the first adhesives. Initially, cancels with 18 horizontal bars were issued to the Bureau de Direction. There were just 4 of those: Antwerp, Brussels, Ghent and Liège, but within the alphabetical sequence, whilst the 131 Bureaux Principaux were allocated numerals, again alphabetically, but with just 17 horizontal bars, as in Verviers here. Smaller offices were given devices with vertical bars, and from 1857 devices with 8 thicker bars were used for new offices and as replacements, such as 83 here for Mons. The horizontal bar sequence reached 208 and the vertical one 145. They were replaced by a combined list in 1864 of Punchstempel, initially alphabetical to 410, so Elch to Zell, and subsequently reached 454 before the system was discontinued on the 10th of March 1873. And you get a few examples on this slide. In Denmark, which issued stamps in April 1851, the stamps were smaller than most and initially cancelled with a mute target type of device. But in 1852, the advantages of identifying the office were clear, and 3 ring numerals were introduced with effect from the 1st of October 1852. Copenhagen was 1, and the royal offices in Hamburg and Lübeck 2 and 3 respectively. 4 to 81 were then allocated alphabetically to the offices in Denmark and Schleswig. So Bergens, Berg and Viborg are examples here, and Sorrow on cover As new offices were opened, they were allocated numerals to 112. And then in July 1853, the system was extended to Holstein and Lauenburg, with numbers between 113 and 163. Further openings eventually extended the system to 230 by 1864, when war with Prussia led to the losses of the duchies. So we've got three of the examples of the lost territories here: Altona, Kiel, and Oldenburg. It also meant a number of numerals became available for reallocation, and despite which more were needed, and ultimately reaching 286 by 1884, the final allocation including offices in Iceland and the Faroes, which were then part of Denmark. France also issued postage stamps on the 1st of January 1849 and introduced numeral cancels precisely 3 years later on the 1st of January 1852. It's the largest introduction anywhere, as there were already a well-developed postal service in a large country. And the issuance was largely alphabetical, 1 to 3,703, Abbeville to Yves-l'Évêque initially. The offices abroad were allocated the next 6 numbers, and offices in Algeria 3710 to 3739. New offices were added to the sequence, and there was a particularly large addition when the counties of Nice and the Duchy of Savoy were added on the 12th of June 1860, as the price of French consent to Italian reunification. And here we have a cover from Ruffio in Savoy to Florence. Now the format of the device was a diamond of dots with a numeral in relatively small figures, just 4 millimeters high. All figures could fit comfortably on the stamp, but they were not always easy to read, and the examples chosen here are the exceptions. The series was withdrawn at the end of 1862 to be replaced by the Grossschieber series with figures 7 millimeters tall, which lasted until 1876. And we'll come back to that later. So what about other parts of the world where numeral cancels were introduced in the 1850s? Well, this slide includes some of the British colonies, and if it's in brackets, then there's no slide coming up. New South Wales, with the famous Sydney View stamps issued on the 1st of January 1850, were issued alongside 96 numeral cancelled, which were issued to the country post offices. The design is a barred numeral. 1 to 20 have 4 bars on all 4 sides, so the Windsor example, and 21 to 96 2 bars. So we've got Balronald and Richmond River here. Additional numbers to 178 were issued up to 1857, and these reverted to the 4 bars at a side, as in Carrel. Offices issued with cancels include those for the Moreton Bay district in today's Queensland, and shown here on the Sydney View Thrupney block of 4. Moreton Bay separated on the 10th of December 1859, but carried on using New South Wales stamps until the 1st of November 1860. The allocation is interesting. 1 to 20 will use the western route from Sydney, 20 to 53 the southern route, 54 to 87 the northern route, and 88 to 96 were allocated to those places served by the coastal steamer. So that's a rare geographic allocation. In April 1857, an entirely new series of ray numerals was issued to cope with the rapid growth of the colony, but these first offices retained their number. Now, Victoria separated from New South Wales on the 1st of July 1851, but stamps had been in issue for 18 months by then. Thomas Ham produced the stamps, and he also produced a series of 50 numeral cancels at 12 shillings and 6pence each, an attractive butterfly design with a numeral above the butterfly and V below. And here we've got the butterflies 5 and 13 on the tuppenny, both are rare, and 29 on a penny pair. The initial allocation was to 37. Melbourne was 1 and Geelong 15, with the other offices approximately in the order they'd opened. By the end of 1852, new openings had issued up the stock of 50. The figures were considered too small and were replaced by a barred oval design from a different supplier. The butterflies were withdrawn, and the allocation of barred numerals was different, though Melbourne was still one. So here we've 18 Portland and 42 Gisborne, also with the what possibly is the discovery copy of 45, which is a still unidentified office. When more were needed, 60 further devices were ordered as the offices opened, and the final number, 109 for Balmoral, opened on the 1st of November 1855. By this time, the gold rush was on, and how the authorities dealt with the rapid expansion in population and offices we'll look at later. Canada, initially, of course, just Quebec and Ontario, issued stamps in April 1851 with a series of 4-ring cancels employed to prevent their reuse. These numbers were issued alphabetically, and here we have 3 examples of London, Ottawa, and St. Thomas. Other provinces such as New Brunswick used numbers from 1854 in an attractive if faint grid. And on the 1st of July 1867, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick joined Canada to become a dominion. In 1868, a new series of 62-ring cancels were issued to reflect this change, and importance played a part in the allocation. So Halifax in Nova Scotia became 4, as here, and Montreal was 1, Toronto 2, Quebec 3. Here are 2 of the final numbers, Cornwall and Clinton. In Barbados, the Britannia stamps and their associated barred numeral cancels were introduced in April 1852 and were in use for 11 years until replaced by the Boot Hill design. One device was allocated to each parish, and here, as shown on the parish map here. And it's one of the simplest countries for the completers to collect. You've got 5 examples of the 11 numerals, and it's contrasted with a Boot Hill 10 of St. Peter. Mauritius ordered numeral cancels in 1850, but they had quite a lot of difficulty actually obtaining a supply, and this series of 2-ring concentric circles only came into use 4 years later for the offices outside of Port Louis. And even today, some of the allocations are tentative. It was followed by a series of barred numeral cancels in 1869, which followed a reorganisation of the island's post offices made necessary by the opening of 2 railway lines. And by 1894, they'd been superseded altogether by circular date stamps. New Zealand stamps were initially printed by Perkins Bacon, and a series of 18 cancellers were sent out with the plates in late 1854. Came into use in 1855. The range eventually extended to 25 in number. And then the use of date stamps came in at the beginning of 1863. And here we see a range of the numerals on the classic Chalon head design. Coming back to Europe for a few minutes, and the followers, well, the same convention here, so if it's in brackets, there won't be a subsequent slide. It's slightly surprising, perhaps, that Turn and Taxis were not in the vanguard of postal reform, but they continued to provide the postal service for much of Germany. On the 29th of January 1852, they introduced postage stamps in both the Northern District with its silver Grosch and Thaler currency and the Southern District with the Kreuzer Gulden currency. Numeral cancels followed in January 1853, using a 4-ring device, embracing up to 3 figures. 1 to 87 were allocated to Northern District offices, 88 to 217 to the Southern District offices. The numbering system eventually increased to 424 as new offices opened, before they sold the network to Prussia for 3 million thalers, which is effective on the 1st of July 1867, and must be an almost unique sale of a postal service. Brunswick is an altogether simpler field to collect. The stamps were introduced at the beginning of 1852, and the numeral cancels were brought in 1856. Not perhaps the most attractive, with a horizontally barred diamond, but there are only 48 allocated initially, alphabetically Badenhausen to Zorg, and use stopped at the end of 1867 when Brunswick joined the North German Confederation. So here we have a pair from Brunswick Station and two examples on cover with different styles of date stamps proving the office of origin. Stamps were introduced to Spain on the 1st of January 1850, and in 1855 the Spanish post office was reorganised into principal offices and districts. A series of large cartwheel numeral cancels followed in 1858, which are quite attractive and practical. The size of the instrument was 1 inch in diameter, with the numeral in a large figure in the centre, and then 4 smaller figures in the 4 quadrants of the wheel. This ensured the stamp was tied to the letter and that the office could be identified even with just a partial strike. However, the system was discontinued in the early 1870s. They generally show up well against the stamp, as some offices did experiment with blue ink, shown here from 55 Median del Campo. And the scarcest of the numerals is 42 from Santa Cruz to Tenerife. Well, what to do with the smaller British colonies? A post office notice stated that from the 1st of April 1858, stamps could be used to defray the cost of postage of letters posted in Malta, Gibraltar, Constantinople and the West Indies. This is a popular area to collect, and people have given whole 1 o'clock displays on the British post offices to the Royal. Well, today I can only give you a taste. Cancelling devices were issued in the British series, starting with A01 for Kingston, and here we see a penny from Kingston and a fourpenny from St Christopher A12, sixpence from Gibraltar A26, and a shilling from Dominica the A07. The twopence is seldom seen, though was issued. We also have a strip of 4 sixpenny stamps used in Nevis and a cover from Demerara to France, sent in October 1859. In Jamaica, from the 1st of February 1859, British stamps were permitted to be used for internal mail at the village offices, and the numeral cancellation devices came in on the 1st of March. So here we actually have a first day cover from Lilliput to Kingston. At this time, sixpence was the cost of an inland letter sent between 60 to 100 miles. In the West Indies, use on British stamps ceased in April 1860, but the cancellers remained in the colonies and were used to cancel their stamps as the colony introduced them. Jamaica was more organised than most of the other islands and introduced stamps on the 23rd of November 1860, only a few months after the British stamps were withdrawn. Designed by De La Rue and bearing a striking similarity to the British stamps, this too is a popular area with collectors. Here we see a small selection of the offices: A27 of Alexandria, the first, A82 Middle Quarters, which was reallocated from a mail boat, F97 Copse, and 642 Petersfield, all within the British listings. I have 87 of the 88 offices. So then you start to ask yourself, what about all the stamps available at each office? There's about 20 from each. Does vary somewhat, and I now have over 750 different, but some have more than 1600. It is a popular area, and for A73 St Anne's I've got this on 22 different stamps. From July 1865, the British agencies in Latin America were authorised to use British stamps. There were many agencies across Central and South America and can make for a colourful display. Here's as a small sample the C30 of Valparaiso, C57 of Greytown in Nicaragua, and C83 for Rio de Janeiro. St Thomas continued to be one of the most important agencies, and you see the C51 here on a 5 shilling. The cover is from the Peruvian port of Callao to Hanover, and the 1 dinero paid the Peruvian postage from Lima to Callao, which was then carried on British packet at the packet rate of 1 6pence, with threepence more for postage to Germany, less a penny rebate for no UK internal postage. The agencies generally closed when the host country joined the UPU in the 1880s. But if you really want to challenge yourself with numerals, here are 4 countries to consider. Well, France, firstly, and even in countries with the well-developed postal service, the dramatic increase in mail volumes following postal reform led to a significant expansion in the number of offices. So when the petit chiffres were replaced by the gross chiffre on the 1st of January 1863, the network was almost twice the size of 10 years earlier, and would continue to expand by a further 50% until use stopped in 1876. Only a limited amount of this was due to the addition of territory such as Savoy, now firmly integrated into the alphabetical system. And you can see from this cover from Albi, sent by a Justice of the Peace, and also shown are cancels from each of the thousands up to 6317 of Léon-les-Brotteaux. The large figures do stand out well on all colours, but particularly the paler shades. This is the largest numeral series you can collect. In Italy, numeral cancels were only introduced officially on the 1st of May 1866. They adopted a slightly different system, with 1 to 28 allocated to first-class offices, here Livorno, 29 to 235 second-class offices, and 236 to 2502 to third class. And within each group they were allocated in alphabetical order. So the initial design was a stippled rectangle, and the examples here show a first-class office Livorno, second-class Verona, and a third-class office Persigiano. Reunification was furthered when Lombardy and Venetia were added to the Kingdom of Italy in 1866, and the cancels added to these offices a year later on the 1st of May 1867. Was a further major extension when the Papal States were added from the 1st of January 1871. And the highest number in this series was 3082 of Monte Urano, which opened on the 1st of March 1876. Now, with the expansion, the original stippled series was replaced by an oval of 11 bars with space for the number in 1877. Now, this was done by withdrawing the first device and replacing with the second type, so that offices retained their number, and these continued in use until the 31st of December 1889. The final number allocated was 4473 to Tarsogno. And shown here are the first-class office of Cagliari and 2 third-class offices of Luciano and Torre Annunziata. The orange colour of the stamp helps showcase the postmark. New South Wales is another to consider, and we end with 2 of my favourite Australian states. For each of these I've over 1,000 different numeral cancels, and each could easily be a display on its own. Now, you'll recall from earlier that New South Wales introduced a completely new series in April 1857 to the 193 country offices. Each office retained its number, which helps considerably with attribution. These numerals were based on a ray design. The first style had 4 segments to each ray and lasted until 1863, with the number of rays varying with different batches of manufacture, 17 to 21 rays early on, and here we have Mudgee number 18 with 17 rays, and it increased to 26 rays for the numerals between 246 and 256, here illustrated by Gloucester. And then there was a distinctive 35 ray canceller in use for numbers 258 to 377. And here we've got Lake Macquarie Road 299, which is ex Max Watson. And so, yes, numeral cancels can be from single lot name sales. The same design was used for replacements as and when needed. The ray design continued to be used until 1876. But in 1863, the design was simplified a bit so that each ray had only 3 segments and there were fewer rays. So there were 16 rays for 402 to 553. Here you've got 447. 20 for numbers 557 to 578, in deep water here. And finally 12 rays for the numerals between 578 and 835, here shown by Palamalawa. The slide shows an example of each type, and each canceller remained in use until it wore out, so busier offices tended to need more devices. And it also gives you some idea about just how rapidly the colony was growing. In 1876, New South Wales adopted a barred numeral design, initially without sides. The 837 Essington here has a 3R rating, so that's fewer than 10 copies known. But very shortly afterwards, sides were brought in, and these were used to cope with the expansion of the network right through to 1904, when the final numbers 2099 and 2100 were issued. The barred numerals were also used for replacements and for the duplex cancels issued to busier offices. The examples selected show that the postal clerks were careful, and they did manage to get the 4 numerals to show up on the face of the stamp design, despite the relatively small size of the stamp. 2072 is also X Max Watson, and this one's 4R, so less than 6 known. So to conclude, one of my absolute favourites, Victoria, with its wonderful variety of ways of showing the numeral, and uniquely even employing Roman numerals. The barred numeral cancels were introduced in January 1856 to a completely new allocation. Melbourne retained 1, Geelong became 2, and up to 87 were allocated to existing offices. The 11 salaried offices first, and then alphabetically 12 to 86, Alberton to Yohan Hill. Thereafter they were issued in approximate order of opening, concluding with 2100, King Valley, which opened on the 15th of November 1906. Now, over the 50 years they were in use, the star was bound to change, with supply from different contractors. So this slide shows a variety of styles, starting with the 2 bars of Elphinstone and Glenlyon, then without bars for St Leonard's, with figures 11 millimeters tall for Bring Along and Yark, and we haven't even got to 4 figures yet. Clearly sidebars had to go from the design, and the later 4-figure numbers do show slightly smaller figures. So we have Ocean Grove, Belar, and the last one of all, King Valley, also one of less than 10 known. Now this glosses over what Victoria did when she did reach that 1000th office in June 1877. Someone had the bright idea of using Roman numerals, which worked well at first, but as the network continued to expand, there were a lot of C's to try to accommodate. The series was only partly Romanized, with just the hundreds being Roman and the tens and units Arabic numerals. So I've tried to show one from each century here, and there's a particular peculiarity in MCC2 of Flynn's Creek. So what, if any, conclusions can we draw? Well, the numeral cancels originated in Britain in 1844. They were widely adopted across much of Europe and the British Empire, and I'm sorry if I haven't managed to include your favourite country. The purpose of obliterating the stamp to prevent reuse in an identifiable way was a success, but the sheer growth in postal volumes and the number of offices required to handle these volumes meant that there were better ways of achieving that purpose. Some countries abandoned the method by the 1870s, and elsewhere it carried on until the Great War, but the heyday was the 1850s and the classic stamps of that era. Markings do just about make it as postal history, a postal history exhibiting category, but the rules give a strong preference to marks on cover, so exhibits on stamps are seldom seen. It remains a wonderful area, though, for the collector who wants to collect what they like. So thank you for the chance to showcase one of my collecting vices, and I hope it's given you some pleasure too. Thank you.
Well, the good news is, Simon, that someone's asked you a question.
Wow.
Which I will just find here. It's our friend Keith. Keith Burton asks, is it possible to differentiate the style between the two periods of closed mill wheels in Bavaria? He finds them very difficult to separate unless the cover has a date somewhere or an enclosure.
No, not really. It's no, that's it. It makes Bavaria a very frustrating territory to collect, because if you get the closed mill wheel, you just don't know. I mean, as I said in the slide, if you can identify the plate, if it's on the blue stamp, you've got a reasonable chance. The first couple of plates, it's likely they were on the first allocation, and by the time you get to plates 4 and 5, then you can be certain, because they came out after the second allocation, you're on a second allocation stamp. But the design, not really, no.
Right, thank you. At the moment, that was the only question that's been raised in the chat. That being the case, Simon Martin Redmond, I suggest back to you, sir.
I don't really know where to start on this. I can remember as a schoolboy, one started art by getting a book, and it was painting by numbers. And this is sort of philately by numbers.
Yeah.
This says more about the psychology of the individual than it actually does by what he's actually collecting, because it's infinite. And I have to ask the question that, do you actually collect them by number, by number, by number? Do you sort of say, this is Barden and there's X number of Barden, and then you mount them number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and leave the gap, and then you try and fulfill the gap? But I don't really know where to start, because some of the stuff you showed, I mean, apart from, as you know, I love aesthetics of a collection, and all of the cancels were beautiful. The quality of the stamps was superb. I know, as you do, that some of that stuff is very, very difficult to find as a stamp, let alone on some of the covers you had. But it really does, you know, you sort of blew my mind on more than one occasion. You know, we started off with a GB stamp, Simon, you know, England 1 to 930, and I thought, I wonder how many of those 1 to 930 he has. And I thought, knowing Simon, probably most of them. And then Scotland and Ireland, and that itself I can compartmentalize. And then you started going about all the German stuff and the Prussian stuff, and it started to get to me as if it was a bigger and bigger task. But one, knowing you and your personality and your sort of accountant's personality, that I can see you taking much pleasure just constantly finding more and more examples. I'm sort of weird like you, but thank God I'm not quite as weird, because I can keep a Sarawak. I collect some of the postmarks of Sarawak, which most collectors would be very pleased to have one example of the postmark in the collection. But like me, like you, Simon, if that postmark was in use for 13 years and 3 issues, I want it on all 3 issues. And you mentioned that you try to do the same sort of thing. I love the Lima cover just because it was so beautiful. You talked about your favourite state, New South Wales, and you know, you said I have about 1,000. Threw that line away. I have about 1,000 cancels of New South Wales, and then you said Victoria, 11 main offices, then to 86, and then to 2,100. And I can just imagine you. I mean, I don't know where you find this material. I know recently you bought a nice little lot, because you did tell me that, but you must constantly be checking every dealer's stock and auction catalogue. But I come back to it, Simon. It was a fantastic display. It blew my mind, but it says more about you than it does about your collection. It's about the psychology of the collector, okay? And I think the way you collect these stamps says an awful lot about, I should imagine, 80 to 90% of us watching this afternoon, that we all have that degree of madness in our personality. I have to say, Simon, it was superb. I loved every minute of it, and you should be applauded. God knows where you store this stuff, but I know Alison says she's told me about your garage, but that's a story for another time. Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you, Simon. And actually, on the subject of saying thank you, we do actually have a certificate of appreciation for you, which I will put up on the screen
Right. Thank you.
Obviously, the original of that pretty obviously will be presented to you either in the post or it'll be given to you by the president. So that obviously is our appreciation for your amazing display, as Simon's already outlined. It's an amazing presentation. So thank you for that.
Yes, and I forgot to mention this block of 4 Sydney views on cover, which I did find quite mind-boggling. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
nice one.
Yeah.
Really good.
It's a slightly crazy subject, as you say, and actually Zoom was perfect for doing this. I've been, you know, you're right. How do you display these is quite difficult. It's tedious, really, for most people if you just put them out in numerical order. There's the odd ones, like some of the early ones from New South Wales, where you could try and display them by postal route and put a little map on them and illustrate them the way Gary does with his Great North Road. But there's few and far between as to how you display postmarks in any kind of interesting way. And that's why I just thought, oh, I don't know, Zoom just might work on this.
It's I Spy of collecting.
Yeah, it is a bit, yes, yes.
We all started with I Spy books, so it's I Spy of collecting. I just think it's wonderful.
Now, on the subject of books, we have a question from Andrea who asks, can you recommend a comprehensive book for stamp collectors?
It's more or less country by country. I mean, I think for nearly all the ones I showed there, I do have at least one book on the numerals, and one or two, like, in fact, I just acquired a list of all the numeral cancels of Holland, partly because I was actually asked to judge somebody's numeral cancel display in America on Dutch numeral cancels, but it came quite quickly and was remarkably inexpensive. And the Prussia book's a very nice book, and that's quite a desire. That's probably the most expensive one to get, but really for each country, Peter Feuser does a listing for all the German states, which just gives you a simple listing with a rarity scale, which is quite useful. But you do also have to be slightly careful about some of the more expensive numerals because they have been forged. And as the odd one I've got quite excited about, and I thought, no, but it's a forgery, so it doesn't matter.
So as is often the case, there isn't a single book, but by having a series of.
Yes, I mean, I've got, as I say, for any of those, I will have
Right.
a listing. And there is one book, actually, again, quite a simple old book from about 50 years ago, I think lists all the numbers of the British Empire. So that's only a 50 or 60 page one.
I mean, there's 2 or 3 books on the GB ones, isn't there?
Oh, yes. No, there's a whole, well, I've got the whole Parmenter series up there, and yeah.
This is Andrea.
Hello.
Hi. Are you interested only in the cancellations or also in the stamps themselves?
Oh no,
I
do like the stamps. Yes. I mean, I've always liked the classic stamps, and they appealed. And then, you know, generally speaking, if you mint copies of most of the classics are very expensive items to get, whereas you can usually get the used ones. And then you start thinking, well, you know, then you start thinking, well, the cancel's interesting too. So
yeah. I have a large collection of stamps, and they're partially from my parents and also from their parents, and they're from all around the world. There are probably some that you would like to see at least, but the thing is, I know nothing about their value, or now I learned a little bit about the numerical cancellations, which is very interesting. So I can go back and look at them and see what numerical cancellations they have. But there are some really interesting stamps in there. And like I said, I have them and I know nothing about them. So I'm trying to figure out how could I learn more about the stamps that I have.
It's certainly a popular area in Germany. And there's quite a number of the auction houses in Germany.
Well, I'm in the US.
Right.
Yeah. But my stamps are from all around the world.
Right.
Well, the Australian auction houses tend to list the Australian ones. The German auction houses are generally quite happy, and they will have lots on numeral cancels. In the UK, it tends, and I think in America, it tends not to have the same sort of following. So it's the kind of thing we do as a specialist bit in our West Indies study group auction. Cancellations are often appeal, and the major auction houses tend not to look at postmarks so much. So that's where specialist societies score, because that's where you'll find the collectors who know which ones are difficult and which ones are more common.
I have an interesting question for you, though. Why is it that you had no stamps from the US?
They did have some cancels, but they're remarkably ugly cancels, and they just totally obliterate the stamp. They really did serve their purpose, and it wasn't a very large series either. So,
but it would be interesting because you're talking about colonies and collecting stamps and cancellations from all the colonies, but you completely skipped over the US.
Yes. To be fair, the US is one country I really don't have much of a collection of.
Is that you being diplomatic?
Anyway, Simon.
The US,
you got me curious now, though. I have to tell you, I have to go and find some stamps from the US now, because I would like to see what they look like and the cancellations.
Yes.
How ugly they really were.
I think in the US, people get more excited about the court cancels on some of the early stamps.
No, beautiful cancels. Beautiful cancels, but they don't have any numerical ones, do they, Simon?
No, they're mainly sort of bits of New York on. They're like some of the London cancels. They're very heavy obliterators, and they're not an attractive.
See, Wade Sardi's collection of US cancels is quite amazing. It's beautiful, but it's illustrated cancels.
Yeah.
I think we need to find some. We need to find some from the US, and we need to do a second presentation on of the cancels of the US.
I think you also skipped over Ceylon, didn't you, Simon?
Yes, I did. I could have shown Ceylon. Ceylon was on my list, actually, and they're still largely in a stock book, not on an album page, Ceylon. So.
Right. Simon,
Yeah.
I've got a couple of things here. Patrick would like to make a comment. Patrick, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Simon, super display. Shame you missed out Tasmania.
No, Tasmania, Western Australia, Ceylon, Norway were all ones that could have been added.
But the only display I've seen before, which is on Tasmania cancels, Randall Askeland had a complete collection of all the numeral cancels, including a comment each time when some new ones were issued, which contractor had done them. Most of them were on cover, but he managed to get it all done in a 10-frame exhibit.
Yeah.
Which was, I think, a splendid achievement, but it put me off ever trying to do anything similar. So I still collect them, but not as enthusiastically as he did. But thank you very much for the wide range and wonderful quality of the material you've shown today. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you. That's very kind.
I think Susan Taylor has a question. If Susan would like to unmute.
Yes, I've done that.
Right.
Hi, Simon.
Hi.
Thanks very much for a really interesting presentation. I just had a question about following on from the numericals, and you were talking about, for example, Victoria. Yeah. And I whilst you were talking, I got an old stock book that I have out. I don't, as you know, I don't collect Australia. And I did have a number of numerical cancels for Victoria, but it looked to me as if can I show you this? Am I going to the right place? I don't know.
Oh,
How do I do? Oh, whoops, something's coming here.
Hang on a minute.
Can you see that?
No, not yet.
Oh yes, yeah. You got.
So did this follow on? Did this? Do you see what I'm saying? It's a barred cancel.
Yes, no,
That's
I
Victoria.
think, yes, but it would. Yeah, they didn't. I think is it Melbourne and moved took that one on.
This is a Victoria stamp, and
Yes,
it's
with Victoria
Victoria on it, and then I have another one similar thing with Tasmania, and I just wondered, did they then move on to that, or did they? What's the reason for those cancels?
Can you show it again, please?
What, the Victoria one?
Yes, whatever it was held up just now because we weren't looking.
Can you see that? I'm not sure.
No, not now.
Right.
Hang on a minute.
Face, perhaps.
It has Victoria in words in the bars.
Yeah, just a minute. I'll find the camera in a minute and be able to.
Yeah.
Oh, here we are.
Oh, there we go.
Victoria.
Got the word Victoria across the middle.
Yeah, and hang on, I've got one here. Just bear with me. That says Tasmania. So I just wondered if they followed on from the numbers or if they were a precursor or what.
Can I answer that?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, please do.
Yes, but almost entirely just used for Melbourne. And if you want the book of them, and there is a whole book, it's called The Cancellations of Melbourne, 1861 to 1912, and was written by Don Davis and Guy Linfield with collaboration of Purvis. Okay, I'm sure there's a copy in the library. It was published in December 1980.
Oh, I was just curious. I'll have a look next time I'm there. Thank you.
And if I tell you there are 63 pages of them and there are about 7 on each page.
Oh, goodness.
Oh, it's like you can end up collecting the coded letters of Kingston in the date cancel that come out. You can get all the letters of the alphabet basically in the code.
Yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, on the subject of listings, Simon, Stan asks, is there a complete listing of all the various Indian numeral cancellations? He says the best he has is in the Robson Lowe Encyclopedia, which was published at least 60 years ago.
I'm not really aware. There is a sort of listing. I mean, I'm not aware of a good book on the subject. I mean, India was really divided between the 3 presidencies of Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta. And you'd sort of break it down into 3, but there's a task there for someone to write the book, I think. Stan's shaking his head. You need a new book on numeral cancel, Stan.
I've done Ireland. That's quite enough.
I did give you a credit earlier.
Okay. Simon, can I give an apology to you?
Sure.
You asked about barred oval 45.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Purvis, I've looked at Purvis's page and I should have done this before for you. It looks as if it's probably, and I don't know whether I can pronounce this correctly, Glenorchy, Glenorchy.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it was formerly Wimmera. I'm not very good on these Australian names. Basically, they very rarely use the numeral numbers. They tend to use the circular date stamps. And if you go to Freeman and White, in fact, strange enough, it seems that they were also allocated the same number under the numeral cancellations, 45. And the note says originally 4 post in, then Wimmera until the 1st of January 1854, used for a short time, butterfly 25 and then 42, use Wimmera circular cancellation and then Glenorchy circular cancellation, barred oval numeral. Okay, sorry.
No, okay, good.
Just to assure you, I don't collect these.
But like me, you've got the book, yeah.
Simon, one thing that did strike me, when you're looking at Canada, I think Ottawa was number 27 or 47.
It was 27, yes.
Yeah. But Ottawa's the capital of Canada. Why doesn't it have number 1?
Well, it wasn't in the 4-ring ones. It's well, I'm not sure actually where the capital was when it was, because then it was just the Lower Canada then.
It was Dominions, yeah.
and on federation, because I think effectively, no, I mean, I did wonder that why when they then did the 2-ring ones, even on importance, also it didn't feature that highly.
Simon, do you actually collect the numericals from Trinidad? Because you didn't show any.
No, I could have shown Trinidad's another one. Yes, there's an album up there full of Trinidad.
Oh, I must.
But Trinidad,
I must have a look at them sometime because I've got them too.
Yeah, it gets quite complicated in Trinidad because there's so many series.
Yeah.
So I thought I can't really fit that into just a quick slide for the country, if you see what I mean. It would be, and it's slightly irritating as well that the very first one has that sort of. So it was just too complicated a story for one slide.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
Simon, I think our friend Ari Muhonen wishes to say something about Finland. Ari.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Finland also has used numeral cancels. They started in 1880s, and we used them for about 100 years until 1980s. And we used them for rural postal routes. So the postmen used this numeral cancel, and when it got to the post office, they got the real real cancel there. And they started from number 1, and they ended up something like 7,500 or so. So that's a new subject for you collect.
Wow. And is that on the stamp or on the envelope?
They are on stamps, yeah.
On the stamps, okay. Right.
Yeah, so the rural postal, the postman canceled the stamp, but then the post office put their cancel on the side.
Okay.
Yeah, so 7,000 new cancels for you.
Okay, I'm going to have a look at my Finnish collection and see what I've got. Yeah, I've not looked at Finland for numerals. No.
Get yourself a new stock book. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a really interesting display. Thank you, Simon. As you say, it really lends itself to PowerPoint. We can look at the detail then. Really good. And Simon Martin Redmond, is there anything else we need to say, or have we reached the end of our meeting?
Just a super display. I loved it. But thank you again, Simon. I'm sure we I don't know how you Zoom clap, but a good Zoom clap from us all.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all for giving up some time on Tuesday afternoon.